Well, I want to thank you for coming, Andre. Of the authors we've had here, you're the newest one to the store, and I really appreciate your coming out here and the fantastic job you did at Printers Row. But why don't you tell us a little bit about, the two mysteries you've done, and the third one you said is coming out in November then, and then you've got one in 2015?
Correct. There are two more, so it'll be four in that series so far. The first two books, and the rest of the series is really the main character is Jonathan Brooks, and he's a maritime lawyer in New Orleans, and it follows his travails. The stories are sort of a hybrid of legal thrillers and spy thrillers. So the stories are very much espionage across many countries, but the character is very much a lawyer, and a lawyer stuck in these very, very difficult situations. The second book, The Serpent's Game, actually starts 3 days before Katrina strikes New Orleans. So the first half of the book is really his struggle in the city, that's the chaos that ensues, as well as an underlying espionage story that begins in New Orleans and then goes to Central America.
And the third one?
The third one is actually, I can say it is my favorite so far. It's because of the research that went into it. So I traveled to North Korea and I traveled to Ukraine, and both those countries are in this next book. Of course, when I was in Ukraine, it was not the Ukraine of today, it was the Ukraine of a year ago, which was a very tranquil place. Mm-hmm. North Korea was fascinating. It's really a lot of what you see on TV, and then there are a lot of things that we have some misconceptions about, both good and bad. So I've blended both those scenarios into the stories, again with Jonathan Brooks, and we're doing the final editing now with my editor, and she's pretty excited about it, as I am.
In terms of, does your background, your experience, like I know you do a lot of traveling, because getting a hold of you and talking to you, you're here, is that kind of where you get your ideas, and is it like stories taken off the front page and then you turn it into?
I think partly. I have my destinations in mind, and I do my research overseas, but I've also lived overseas, and I think that has sort of given me the perspective that stories you can find interesting and build interesting stories and themes out of any place, and urban or rural, third world, developed world, all these places have really some fascinating features. So I try to highlight that in my stories, to take out some very interesting off the beaten path places and blend them into a story that still can be very mainstream.
How does, like in terms of world events, like we were just talking about the Ukraine, or I guess you're not supposed to say the Ukraine, Ukraine. How does that affect when you're in the midst of a story and say something happens? Do you say, no, I'm writing for the period before this happened, or do you incorporate it? Or do you say, that'll be my next book, that'll be in my next book?
It's fascinating that you asked that, because that's exactly what was running through my mind after I'd already written the chapters taking place in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, I wish I could change it, but I can't, because the time period is 2005. So I can't change the time period, that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. But what I did was incorporate some of the things that are very apparent here, and in the conflict in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So you have a Russian ethnic population, and you have the ethnic Ukrainians, and there is tension there. So I've built some of that in, obviously not to a level that it erupted last year, but it is there. So it's sort of a way to blend in and to make it realistic. On a side note about my research, I also went to Chernobyl, and I hope there are no lingering effects from that visit. But I did get rid of all the clothes I wore that day. But we did see the nuclear reactor from about 150 feet away. We went to the abandoned city of Pripyat, where 50,000 people used to live until 2 days after the disaster. They were evacuated. And again, that's one of the key scenes in the book, is in the abandoned city of Pripyat.
Now, your sense of, you having been there, does that also, probably it does, but I mean, how you're going to write about that? Like, in other words, being in the Ukraine would probably be different than being in Chicago, Illinois. In other words, suspicious of what's being recorded about, like as someone reporting, someone following, But nowadays, with with the CIA and the intelligence, community for the government that they're tracking. But do you have a sense that you feel more comfortable, say, being in the United States than you would in, say, a Russian or Eastern European country?
The most worried I've been traveling really is in North Korea, because you really give up all the concepts of civil liberties and security that you feel in any Western society, be it the U.S., Canada, Western Europe. So you give that up the moment you cross the border. And I remember flying into Pyongyang, and at that point, you're there. They are entirely in control of what you see, where you go, and everything. All your personal possessions are within their scrutiny at all times. So that does give you a sense of discomfort, but then you realize, wow, this is a unique experience. Let's make the best of it. Don't misbehave, so that
Keep notes.
So I could make the flight home.
Well, I was just thinking about that. Like, do you use, when you're there and do you use a voice recorder? Do you write down notes? Or
a place like North Korea, no. You don't
okay,
want,
in other words,
you
hope your mind.
Photography is a very important way that I keep notes. So I had 2 cameras, took a lot of pictures. At one point, I was taking pictures with a very small handheld camera while dangling my very large camera as a distraction. So there were pictures that I was able to take that were unauthorized pictures. So you have to be careful. There are tricks and techniques that you can use. The minders like to be spoiled. They have boundaries as to what they can permit, but you stretch that boundary up to a certain point, and you get where they'll look a different way when you're taking a picture of something less pleasant of that society. So you accommodate, you find ways to get the most out of the research you can while still making it out of the country. In Ukraine, though, on that note also, I was at a restaurant, I think it was my second to last night there, and I noticed 2 armored SUVs. And about 4 or 5 armed men, you could see the weapons bulging from under their shirts, observing the dining area, the outside dining area. So I inquired with the waiter. I said, well, who famous is dining indoors? I knew it wasn't for me. So I asked, and he didn't. He said,
no, nothing.
Yeah, he turned away. So I never got a straight answer. But it must have been someone far higher than any position in the government, because I found out later a lot of the corrupt society in Ukraine, as it is in Russia and a lot of Eastern Europe, they have better protection than government officials. So that convoy was, when he left, that convoy was 6 vehicles and about 18 bodyguards, maybe 19. I counted as many as I could, but definitely someone not official, but that's the reality of Ukraine, even today.
Now, in your work and in your writing, would you venture to go back to North Korea and Ukraine? Or would you rather avoid it now until everything, well, I don't know if things will ever settle in North Korea, but...
Ukraine, I would love to go back. I'd love to go to Syria and Libya. Again, I do want to make it out of the country, so there are safety issues that I have to consider. North Korea, I will not get a visa to go back. And and the reason is because you've published. The minute you've published, you can no longer go back. And I published a photography book. It's a very large frame photography book about North Korea, about my research. So at that point, I knew I could no longer go back because these were pictures that were not approved.
Well, I want to thank you for coming out and talking about your books, and I hope you come back. You know, as a single author to promote your next book coming out.
Absolutely.
And do that.
Delighted.
And I'm very fortunate in terms of I feel like Sammy Sosa, Mr. Writer's been very, very good to me. But I mean, in terms of that, and so I appreciate your coming out here, because just as you're new to me, means I'm new to you. So again, thanks for coming out here. I appreciate it.
And you have a terrific bookstore. I love this bookstore. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.